But right now, great news for Shapes of Grief in Greystones. The Grief Education Programme has won a Social Entrepreneurs Ireland Award worth €40,000. The woman behind the programme and podcast is Liz Gleeson, who joins us on the line. Morning, Liz.
I'm here, Declan. Thanks.
Great. So I was saying to you, congratulations. And for people who don't know what the Shapes of Grief podcast is, tell us more.
Yeah, great. So I'm working in Greystones as a grief therapist, Declan, and I noticed that anybody coming looking for support after a significant loss or a bereavement, they were really sort of shocked and perturbed by the way grief was affecting them, because we just don't talk about grief enough. So 3 years ago, I set up a podcast, and my aim was to have people tell their stories, because people love to tell their stories, and have other people listen to them to feel a little bit less alone, a little bit less isolated, and to normalise grief, if you like. And the podcast has been a tremendous success. There's around 70 episodes, and it's been played over 100,000 times around the world, actually, which is lovely. But I noticed that a lot of people were asking me or telling me that they found it really educational. So nurses, doctors, psychotherapists were listening, and they were saying, you know, it's so much more than just a story. I'm learning so much about how to be with grief, how to support people who are grieving, and understanding the grief process more and more. So with that, I took on another project, Declan, and it's an education programme. So it's the Shapes of Grief education programme, and it's targeted at people, particularly mental health professionals, who are working with anyone who is grieving, so that they can be more competent and confident working alongside grief, understand it more, learn what to say, what not to say, how to be alongside it. And it's fantastic. I've over 40 hours of really targeted grief education with 26 international grief experts from around the globe all participating in it as well. So that's the programme that won the award.
Well, and you had to, of course, confront grief in your own life.
Absolutely, yeah, but many losses. And sometimes the losses that we experience in our own lives aren't, they're not necessarily bereavements, or they're not that obvious. Sometimes we can grieve unbeknowingly things that we've never had, or, the way things are and we wish they weren't. It could be, the mental health of a parent, for example, or growing up in a family where there's alcoholism. We've many, many different losses, and I was no different. I certainly had what we call ambiguous losses. They are losses that aren't obvious on the outside, but they're experienced on the inside. Someone very close to me died when I was 12, and then another peer died when I was 19. So a series of losses, both overt losses, if you like, and also some hidden, ambiguous losses, brought me to want to study grief and understand grief more. And then at my own recent loss, my father died back in March this year. So I'm one of the COVID bereaved, and had one of those COVID funerals where we had to almost draw straws to who gets to go to the funeral. So it's been a roller coaster of a year and a half, not for everyone, but particularly I think those of us who've been bereaved in the middle of it.
Approach to grief by individuals, as they go through the loss and the anger and all those different stages. Is it possible, and you've probably proved it is, to actually design a programme to help people when people react so differently?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, number one, there are no stages of grief. It's a myth. It's a myth that has taken hold, and grief does not come in stages. Like, wouldn't it be so nice if it did, if it was so neatly packed up into stages? Because that kind of insinuates there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there really isn't with grief. And like you so rightly say, everybody grieves so differently. However, we're more alike than we are dissimilar. There's certain things certain patterns that we see over and over again. Now, I suppose it's important to say that the research shows most people don't need support, professional support, in grief. They absolutely need community support, family support, friendship. That is absolutely vital. And that's enough for most people. And that's around 60% of people, the research would tell us. Now, about another 40% of people do need extra support. And we kind of know those, who those people might be. And that might be where, ironically, where a relationship was perhaps difficult, where there's regret, or where a death is sudden, or where a death might be untimely, so a parent losing a child, or, for example, multiple miscarriages. We know where the complications can come, and we know what to look out for. But there's so much we can learn about grief. We can learn, the media tends to talk about grief like it's this one blob of a thing, and it's not. It's so multifaceted. First of all, there's so many different types of loss. Like I mentioned, divorce, miscarriage, the loss of a pet, maybe emigration, the loss of ill health, the loss of a womb following a hysterectomy. There's so many losses we go through, and therefore grief can be so different as well. And it depends on so many factors, like how we attach to people, what our relationships are like, how resourced we are, what was our mental health like before the loss, how does the loss affect it. So I suppose an experienced grief therapist or a psychotherapist who's grief educated will learn how to look for these things. So the program that I've designed addresses much of this. And also, critical thinking is really important. What's true for one person may not be true at all for somebody else. One person may love people asking, dropping in, supporting, how are you? Somebody else may not want that at all. So part of the education program is knowing what to look for, knowing when to intervene, knowing when to stay quiet, knowing the different levels in which grief affects us, like the way it affects us physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially, financially. There's so many things that we need to learn about grief to be able to support it adequately in clinical practice.
Yes. Well done on this, and well done on the award. I was just thinking while you were talking there that sometimes the people who are supportive initially just wonder when they should change a little bit of their tack. Do they start moving on, or do they start coming back to maybe a repeat of, the same discussion over again, and which way to approach it? Don't want to hurt anyone, but feels maybe could we just move a little bit forward and then maybe leaving the bereaved behind? People find it very difficult. I've heard of people crossing the road not to talk to someone because they don't know how to support somebody.
Absolutely. I mean, you're so right in all of that. And this is, I was talking to someone from the Irish Hospice Foundation yesterday. We were just having a chat, and we were saying how, on one hand, we need people to become specialists in grief, to understand grief, to be able to work with grief. Yet, on the other hand, everybody needs to become informed about grief. It's not just up to a few psychotherapists. Because we will all experience grief, and we will all need support in grief, and we will all support people also. And all those cliches that you just mentioned, that happened to me in March. I had people duck around the aisle of my local supermarket because maybe they didn't have time in that moment, or didn't want to get into it, or were really uncomfortable. And I think that's more what it is. People are really uncomfortable with grief, perhaps because they're uncomfortable with their own grief, and it scares them. Other people's grief can scare them, So, we've all that ducking around supermarket aisles and crossing the road or pretending they don't see you, which can be very, very hurtful. I mean, I didn't take it personally because I know that happens, and that happens to everyone. But in answer to the other thing you said about moving on after a certain time, Like, we don't move on from grief. It's not an event that happens in March 2021 that we sort of bounce back from or get back to normal. Like, grief changes us profoundly. A significant loss will change who we are, the fabric of our being profoundly. And we learn to integrate our loss. We learn to adjust to our loss. We learn to accommodate our loss. And we move forward with our loss and with our grief. And for a lot of people, that's really uncomfortable. They want the old us back. You know, they don't want to be around this new version that we've become, having lost somebody significant in our lives. And people can put pressure on us to go out and socialise. And actually, it's the last thing you want to do when you've had a profound loss. Your social circle shrinks. And, you know, grief, for everybody, it's different. My father was elderly. He had a good death. I was well prepared. So it wasn't a profound shake-up in my life. Now, I have children. If something were to happen to my children, that would be a completely different story. And it takes months and sometimes years to fully integrate the loss. And the true friends are the ones who stand by us months and years after the loss and don't expect anything. You know, don't expect us to bounce back or don't expect us to, you know, behave a certain way. The true friends are the ones who can really stay in the pit and bear our grief with us. And for anyone experiencing a profound loss, that is what they need. They don't need people pulling them out of their grief. They need those who are willing to get down into the pit of grief and sit there with them until they're ready to gradually make their own way forward, you know, with this new self that they've become. I hope that makes sense.
Well, congratulations, Liz. I know that you're county ambassador with the Irish Hospice Foundation and obviously all your work with the grief therapy, and €40,000 for the grief education programme. How will you spend that?
I will use it wholly and utterly to spread the word about the programme. It's unrestricted in that we're allowed to spend it in any way. Now, it's such a brilliant award, and I have to say, you know, look up Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. Some of my co-awardees are absolutely fantastic in what they're doing. And Social Entrepreneurs Ireland are giving a much-needed hand on the back to those of us who are trying to bring forward a social mission, if you like. You know, we want to impact on people as opposed to lining bank accounts. So their support is absolutely vital to bring us forward with that, especially when we work alone or, you know, developing these projects alone can be so lonely. So the award itself is, it's worth €40,000. So €20,000 of that is cash in an unrestricted manner to use as we wish. And then it's a €20,000 program, a program worth €20,000, where we have access to, you know, financial advice, legal advice, marketing advice. So it's absolutely fantastic. It's like getting an organisation around us for 9 months. So the money that I get will be 100% put into my programme to try and get the word out there to counsellors, psychotherapists, nurses, mental health professionals, frontline workers, first responders. This is the programme that they've wanted and they've been waiting for. How do I deal with grief? How do I break bad news? How do I be around death? How do I be around bereavement? You know, it's filled with really great evidence-based clinical work to inspire and educate people. So that's where I want to spend the money, Declan, is getting it out to these people. And,
well, many congratulations on that, Liz. It's Liz Gleeson, who's the woman behind the programme and podcast, and it's the Grief Education Programme and Social Entrepreneurs Ireland Award of €40,000. It's Shapes of Grief. Liz, great to talk to you. Many congratulations, and please do keep in touch.